So quickly about myself and what I work on. So I work on this software called Jenkins. And well, in this context, suffice to say, it's a server app that for developers. It's kind of hard to explain. I've never been able to successfully explain what this software is to my wife. So it's what typically called a continuous integration server. Right? So the main thing in it is that it's extensible through plugins, and then the fact that it's rather easy to use and then get going. And so I'm the main lead developer of this project. I've been doing this since 2004. 2006, the second committer joined the project. So for the first 2 years, I'm the lone guy that's just coding this stuff up. And then in 2008, it became my day job. And then today, it's more than we got more than 450 releases. This kind of crazy number with the 450 plus plugins that's developed by people all over the world. We have more than 300 developers in this project working in various parts of the code base, and we estimate about 27,000 installations worldwide, and each one of those is server apps. So it's probably like 500,000 users all around. I met a lot of users here as well. So, so today what I wanted to talk about was sort of how to create a developer community. So the thing is, because this project started as my hobby project, right? I have very limited amount of resources to this thing. So I have to be really creative and think hard about how to leverage other people's work into this project to make it a successful work. So, I think I have some successful recipe in there that I wanted to share with the other, I guess, the OSS developers or people thinking about developer communities. So, that's the main drive of the talk, because when people think of the open source projects, they tend to think of these big projects, like the well-known ones. Like the one typical kind of OSS project is this company-sponsored project. The successful example that I think of is like JBoss and Spring. This single company owns a lot of developers, and they put the code outside the firewall, but it's sort of a calculated move on behalf of the company, and then it's the money that companies making out of it that's funding this effort, right? The other kind that's very successful is also the foundation model, like Apache and Eclipse, where they got the brand, they got wannabe contributors that they want to chase away by sticks because they got such a famous brand that people want to be a part of it. But most of these things just doesn't work with the smaller projects like Jenkins when it was starting. So, what I eventually came to is this sort of what the sales or the marketing people like to use, which is a funnel model. That the people, on top of the funnel, there are these visitors to your applications, and then some of them turns into users, and if you're lucky, some of them would turn into developers. So the goal here, at least the way I thought of it, is that you want to sort of make this funnel as smooth as possible. And you might think that it's somewhat obvious, but it's actually this funnel is actually quite narrow for most of the people. Because initially, when someone is casually looking at your source code, just a little bit of obstacle could turn them away. Like most of the core Jenkins committers today, when initially they showed up as a user, they're quite casual. So let's say if some of the installation work was a bit too hard, that might be enough barrier to turn them away, and then you lose these potential contributors. And then this kind of thing goes on and goes on forever. Like from the users to developers, there's another obstacles there. And because these things adds up, in every step you lose some people, and then so they kind of multiply. And in the end, you lose a lot of people. And then you don't see them because those lost opportunities, you don't even see them as a developer of the project. So that's what makes it hard to build this thriving community. And just to take one example, right? Because people don't really seem to think of this obstacle. This is just a download page of the iTunes. Well, you might think, well, how hard it is to download the software, right? You just choose the bundle and click the big download button, and then once you start downloading, they show you like what kind of things you're supposed to be doing with that software, and then that's done. And this is just 2 pages, but it actually, there's a lot of engineering went into it behind the scenes. So for example, right now it's showing 2 versions of Windows, because the server is detecting that you're accessing this from Windows, and it's not going to even show you the Mac options. And then because of the crazy Internet Explorer, Actually, it's very hard to start downloading and then show you the separate page. If you go to Skype or Dropbox, they couldn't even figure out how to do it, right? So contrast that with a typical open source project. This is one of my favorite projects. Well, so let's see, where's the download link here? Can you spot where they are? It turns out there's not only one, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3 of them, right? Can you see what those 4 things do? It's very hard to differentiate, even for people who know what they're doing. And if you click one of those, this is a page that they'll take you. So guess where the download link is? It's going to be a major exercise just to download the software. The correct answer is here. There's a tiny letter that says here, right? And so you'd think that this would finally start to download, but nope, not as easy. So it's going to show you this HTTPS certificate error. So you create, you close your eyes and blindly click the proceed anyway. And then finally you'd think to download this stuff, but not so quickly, just here, right? So this is actually a download page. So you have to choose between one of those 16 different versions of flavors that you have to download from. So that's how hard it is. Again, and then, and once you start downloading, right, so what am I supposed to do is download that zip file, right? And then so the correct answer is you have to scroll all the way down, and then there's the 2 links that give you the 31-page PDF that shows you how to install, and then another 50-page for how to get started. So I don't know about you, but by the time I'm going through this is like a day's work already. So that's the kind of opportunity cost. And people doing this project, it's quite smart people. It's just that this kind of thing for people working in the project becomes so obvious that they don't see it as an obstacle. But for people new to the project, this is quite an obstacle. And this is just one tiny example of the download, right? And so there are a lot more interesting things, as you can imagine. So I wanted to talk a few of those things. So one of those is actually like the user support. So this, when I say user support, I mean when people are having problems with the software, you need to be able to help them, right? So this is what I mean by that. And because it's very important to capture people there, because this is when someone is having trouble with your software, that's actually one moment they are willing to spend some time, a serious amount of time, 2 hours, right? So if you can catch them into sort of potentially convert them into the developer, this is a great opportunity. So if you're targeting for developers, the thing you want to do is to kind of push source code in front of them, because here's this potential user willing to spend time on your code, and if you show them the code that in question where it's breaking, they might just feel like looking at the code a little bit more, and then even come up with a fix that eventually might be able to contribute to you. Or then the next step is actually to make people read the code. And then this is also something that most of the developers seems to miss, because again, existing developers of the project, their workflow is optimized against writing code, which is actually a very different exercise from reading the code. And for example, one of the things you can do is for a well-architected project, you tend to have the source code split around in so many small pieces that live in everywhere, right? But when you're reading the source code, those distinctions actually get in your way more than helping you. So if you could show the source code in such a way that there is no such modular distinctions, and then cut across all the stuff, then that makes it easy. And then because people, before they can start writing code, they need to read a lot of code. And so this is kind of, again, another step in helping them to move them into the next stage of the funnel, which is to let them hack code. But again, this is where a lot of projects seems to miss opportunities. For example, a lot of times I get frustrated about being unable to figure out where to check out the source code, like in some of the Eclipse projects. They really do a good job of hiding that things. So, if you can't even check out the code, I mean, what's the chance of my contributing back to the project, right? Or the building and running and testing it, there's all these steps that so easily could turn people away. And then, again, making these things easy would be very useful. So the common pitfalls there is you have a lot of prerequisites about the software that needs to be installed before you could even build the thing. Or when you miss some of those, the build script would fail in very cryptic way, and then you'd be wasting 30 minutes just to figure out one missing dependencies. That's all too common. The other point of sort of encouraging contribution is to modularize your code. Your big applications, any application of non-trivial size needs to be split down into pieces that are individually comprehensible and useful. And there are multiple reasons, I mean, not the least of which is that it's actually good software engineering to do it anyway. But the point is, you know, there are a lot more people who would be interested in smaller pieces that doesn't care about the overall thing that you do. But every those little contributors that only care about those small pieces, that's win to you. That they represent substantial number of users behind them. For each developer that's contributing to your project, represents a lot of users. And then when they can help in a little piece that, you know, that your stuff also built on top of, that makes it, you know, that lets you leverage a lot bigger potential pool of developers. Another thing that also I often see missing in the software is this notion that everything needs to be reusable by another program. Right? So I guess earlier today there was a talk about the APIs and so on, which I think would fall into the same category. But like this application server that I mentioned earlier, you know, people often forget that they need to be driven by other things. Like the Cloud Foundry, for example, will be driving app server. But if they don't have an API, that makes it impossible. And every time one developer was able to successfully build on top of you, that again represents hundreds of users. So that's all the more users on top of your platform, and then that helps you scale. Another reason I guess this is important is because the developers are very opinionated, somewhat anti-social people, right? So it's kind of like the chef. You don't want to having too many of them working in the same code base because they start to fight each other. So the idea is like you give everyone their own sandbox that they can be happily play with, and make sure that those sandbox combine together nicely. And then that's sort of to elaborate on that point a little bit more. That's why we should be preferring the division of labor as opposed to collaborations, especially when it comes to programming. Because the communication is quite painful, frankly, especially when we are talking about the project that's spread around the globe, because time zone, despite all these technological improvement, isn't disappearing. And everyone has their own opinions about, you know, where the white space should come, whether the bracket should be on the same line as the if statement, to other things like whether the inversion of a control is a good thing, or like particular programming language is good or bad. So like it's just so easy to get stuck with those bike shedding arguments, and then that prevents making progress. So and then this is particularly true for the open source projects, where they don't share any context. You know, like this person that's trying to work on this code is only known to you by their handle name, whereas, you know, in the real company or the corporate environment, you know the person, right? So at least that helps you lubricate the conversation a little bit to make progress. But it's not so easy for OSS. So in short, the collaboration simply doesn't scale. Like every developer who wants to contribute on your project, you have to spend some time with the person. And so ultimately, that's what's going to kill your productivity. So in that sense, the silo is actually a good thing for the software development, and then that's what by modularity we mean. But another way to phrase it is this extensibility, also known as the plugins, that makes all the difference. So even when I look at the successful project, I'm just looking some of those I mentioned from the Java learn, but you know, all these successful projects has this notion of building plugins, which is a way of giving everyone their own sandbox to play with. And then in my mind, this is the single most important requirement for building a developer community as opposed to the user community, right? So the extensibility, I think, is really the logical consequence of the modularity. If you take the modularity to its extreme, you get to the point of this extensibility. And then the idea is that the whole thing, when you combine all these plugins, they should feel like a single coherent software to your users. A lot of people claim that they got the extensibility, but they got these points wrong. So for example, I see some people having extensibility API for the plugins that's actually different from what their internal users are using. Right? So that's clearly not a good sign. Or the fact that sometimes what the plugins can do is visibly different from what the core does. Like if you look at some of the Outlook add-ons, they look very different from the core features. So that's a bad anti-sign. So in the end, if you got to the point that the core code is living by the exact same rules and the API that you are letting your plugin developers use, and then I think that's when you can say you got the real extensibility point. And the reason this is important is, like I said, the developers are quite antisocial. So everyone has a different taste about what they should be doing. So the best thing you can do is you don't want to even see what the other guys are doing. Right? So when someone comes up with crazy ideas, the thing you want to say is that's a great idea. Please do it in the plugin in places that I don't see, as opposed to fight with your arguments. So by doing that, ultimately, it's going to be a whole lot more scalable because it only has zero overhead to you, right? When someone does a plugin, you don't really have any additional cycles. So I guess I need to hurry up a little bit. But the last point I wanted to mention is that the extensivity alone is not enough for you. That is, you need some kind of center of the gravity for the community to work as a community, because otherwise everyone will do it in their own places. Like ANT is a good example. There's a lot of ANT extensions, but they are done all over the places. So there's no coherent sort of community that creates the sustainability when people move on to the other things. So that's what makes the Jenkins unique, that we got this center of the gravity. So finally, I wanted to mention about this lowering barrier to the entry, because remember the fundamental model that you want to make everything as easy as possible. So in Jenkins, we allow everyone to have a commit access just by asking. And that's only possible because we got this silo approach of plugins, right? So whatever wacky programmer we get, they're isolated to this little portion of the code. And as a whole, that's a good thing. So in conclusion, I wanted to, there are many shapes and forms to the open source projects. So you should really think about the one that fits you instead of just blindly follow the big ones. And the coding is just actually one piece of it. So creating a social structure for the contribution is a very important part of it. And then, just try to make everything easy relentlessly. And then that's when you make every step easy enough, then the developer community would follow you. So with that, I wanted to, so that's the end of it. Thank you.